Liberation Day or the start of trade war? We're going to talk about President Trump's tariffs and more on today's Trumpet World. President Donald Trump announced his tariffs this week, and they rock the world. I'm joined by Andrew Miiller and Jeremiah Jacques to discuss the fallout. First of all, let's go over to Andrew, our US correspondent, to describe just what President Trump has announced.
Yeah, well, just like Americans celebrate July 4th every year as Independence Day, celebrating their independence from the British Empire, Donald Trump would like Americans to celebrate April 2nd each year as Liberation Day. And he chose that term to basically said that he used these exact words, is making a declaration of economic independence from the rest of the world. So just like the Declaration of Independence declared independence from Britain, this Declaration of Economic Independence is declaring that Donald Trump no longer wants America to be dependent on the rest of the world. He wants to move manufacturing and other things back to the United States to where we will still trade with other nations, but we won't have to if we don't want to. That's the plan. And in order to accomplish this, he pretty much announced what amounts to a baseline tariff of 10% on most nations in the world. And this isn't a retaliatory tariff that's saying, well, you are being unfair to us, so we're being unfair to you. This is just a baseline. From here on out, the Trump administration would like there to be a 10% surcharge when you buy foreign goods. He made it a little bigger for cars. For foreign cars, he put a 25% tariff. So 10% baseline tariff on all nations, 25% tariff on foreign cars. And then he started getting specific with other retaliatory tariffs that are meant to be just put on certain nations until our trade relation with them gets better. Canada and Mexico, obviously, he still wants a 25% tariff. Until they step up border security, at which point it will presumably drop back to 10. The European Union has a 20%. China has a 34%. Two power blocks that actually have been ripping off the United States for many years, so just trying to get more tariffs to bring that down. And which the Trump administration is hoping is really going to make America more competitive on the world scene. To actually get to express the need for this in a more colorful and forceful way than I'm able to produce, we've actually got the first minute and a half of Donald Trump's Liberation Day speech right now.
My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. We're going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. American steelworkers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen, we have a lot of them here with us today. They really suffered gravely. They watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. We had an American dream that you don't hear so much about. You did 4 years ago. And you are now, but you don't too often, and for many years and decades even, you didn't hear too much about. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, so there you heard there. He didn't get into the details I got into about what tariffs on what nations till later in the speech. But he definitely expressed his feeling that other nations have been unfair to America for quite some time. And he's hoping to start bringing that industry back to America. Although, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit in the more, is like just because freedom isn't free, as they say, and even though I think Donald Trump's moves could, if they're carried through to their ultimate conclusion, make America a more self-sufficient, self-reliant nation. There could be some side effects in the meantime. The stock market, the S&P 500 in particular, has dropped pretty drastically this week. A lot of other nations around the world are scrambling to try to come up with their own trade relationships that will make them more independent of America. And actually, a really good analogy I read just this morning in an article from Sean Davis at the Federalist that's pro-tariff. It's titled "Tariffs Are the Only Way to Restore America's Long-Term Economic Health." He's comparing America's addiction to foreign products like a heroin addiction. And definitely in his opinion, he said it's something that he feels America needs to wean itself off of. But drug addictions, when you leave them, normally come with withdrawal effects. And he's pointing out here that it's like Donald Trump's speech makes us look very optimistic that this is all good things for America. And it might make some good things for America in the long term. But in the short term, there's definitely going to be some withdrawal symptoms, including a very turbulent stock market, and including also probably quite a bit of a slowdown in American economic growth. I think America's GDP is still growing, but barely. A lot of the cheap goods we've used international to fuel that economic growth, those sources are starting to dry up, and we haven't yet moved factories here to replace them. So 2025 could be a fairly turbulent year, and Donald Trump's admitted that in other places that there could be some short-term pain on the path to his long-term goal.
And I think that this is probably one of the most controversial things that he's done within his base. I mean, obviously, there's things that the left disagree with. This is something that on the right, there are people very enthusiastic about this. There are people very against this. This is why I'm kind of glad that we've got three people to talk about it, because I do think it's a nuanced subject. And I think there's areas, you've made the case before, Andrew, like, what's the more moral thing to do? To buy cheap products made by slave labor in China, or put tariffs on them? I think that is an issue that has been crying out to be addressed for years. And yeah, great. Like, that China has been taking advantage of America, and that's something that should have been addressed a long, long time ago. And it's great to see that happening. I think there are a couple of things. And on that point, I think Donald Trump is absolutely right when he talks about it's not just tariffs that other nations place on American goods, that there are all kinds of non-tariff boundaries. China will make its currency artificially weaker. And if their currency is weaker, well, that makes Chinese goods that are priced in Chinese currency cheaper. That's a way of cheating on the trade scale. The euro effectively does the same thing for Germany, because Germany is in a union with Greece. It makes the euro much cheaper than the Deutschmark would be, and that makes German cars a lot cheaper. So there's a lot of and then there's regulations that are used to cheat on this. So I think Donald Trump is absolutely right that the rest of the world has been taking advantage of America for a long, long time, and you can absolutely see him. And you can absolutely see why he's dealing with this. I also think his point and your point about protecting American industry, like, look back at World War II. Andrew Roberts' Storm of War is a great kind of one-volume summary of World War II. And he basically says, you kind of needed three things to win World War II. Britain provided the time by not surrendering, by standing alone against Hitler. The Soviet Union provided the men, a whole huge number of soldiers that died to defeat Nazi Germany, and America provided the industry. And the statistics on American industry are absolutely astonishing. And we've talked about, like, I'll talk about, say, the British Empire. And, well, the British Empire, one of the reasons it's a force for good is it helped defeat the Nazis, and that's something that the world should be grateful for. I think you can absolutely make the same case about American industry. American industry saved the world from the Nazis. There is, I think, a debt of gratitude owed by everyone to American industry. And that's a powerful, like, if America had allowed its factories to close down and its steelworks to close ahead of World War II, the Nazis would have won that war. So there are very important national security reasons to keep a lot of these open. What I think, what I think concerns me is that when Donald Trump was presenting this, I mean, he said some things that I think are untrue. Like, he had his chart and he's saying, well, this is the tariffs that other nations place on us, including these, or the trade barriers, including these hidden tariffs and things like that. That wasn't the case. People looked at these numbers, and those numbers are not a measure of how much tariffs countries place on there. I think Israel, it said it was 17%, whereas actually Benjamin Netanyahu lifted all tariffs, and before then it was something like 1%. Instead, where they got these figures from is these figures are based around how much more America is buying of these other countries' products than those other countries are buying of America's. They're a measure of trade imbalance. They're not a measure of tariffs. And the way that he used that kind of implied that all of his administration see tariffs and unfair competition as the only reason for trade imbalance. And that's not true. There are other reasons. Maybe another country is manufacturing something more efficiently than you are. Their workers are working harder. They have redesigned their factories in an innovative way that's more productive. There are other reasons. The fact that America is the world's reserve currency. And there's an element of wanting to kind of have the cake and eat it there. Because if you're the world's reserve currency, you can borrow money more cheaply, you can stay afloat. But the dollar is then going to be stronger than it would otherwise, and that's going to cause trade imbalances. So there are other reasons here, and I fear that some of these reasons are lack of character, lack of education, left-wing social policies. And by blaming all of that on trade, you don't deal with the cause of some of these problems and the cause of these other trade imbalances. And I think the other thing that we need to talk about here is the way the rest of the world responds. And the rest of the world has been taking advantage of America, perhaps not quite as severely, I don't think, as Donald Trump was portraying it, but certainly they have. I think the way that President Trump puts this across and the way he calculated these tariffs, they're actually a lot tougher than he's selling them as. They are not half of whatever tariffs these other countries are putting on America. I think in a lot of cases, they're a lot stronger. So how the rest of the world responds to that is important. And that's where there's a very strong tie-in with Bible prophecy. And I think that's a good time to bring in Jeremiah to talk about what's happening in Asia, because we're seeing some pretty substantial developments in Asia in response to this.
Yes, that's exactly right, Mr. Palmer. And I'm glad that you mentioned that these calculations on President Trump's chart, it actually is a reflection not of tariffs, but of trade deficits that America has with these other countries. And you spoke about these other factors that can cause those deficits. I think a huge factor that I would love to see Mr. Trump and his team consider is population. In many cases, you're talking about countries with a fraction of the population of the USA. And I don't know how you would expect Canada, for example, with 40 million people, to buy as much from us as our 340 million people buy from them. And when you factor the population difference in, Canadians are buying something like 7 times per person, per Canadian, more from America than Americans per person are buying from Canadians. So I think if he would just factor in these vast population differences, that would be one thing that would help him not see that we're being attacked. It's just that they don't have as many people as we do. But yes, the big story that I wanted to talk about for Asia is just that right now we are seeing sworn enemies, blood enemies, finding common ground and making common cause. And it's all happening, or it's largely happening because of the policies of President Trump. So we know that President Trump does not value the relationship with other nations that his predecessors in the White House and other branches of the U.S. government have painstakingly built over the decades. President Trump seems to see only what the U.S. has potentially lost and not the peace and the widespread improvements globally that have been gained from those relationships and from Pax Americana. In his view, it's been only negatives. And so he's taking drastic measures to end those relationships, alienating longtime partners and attacking longtime friends. And a big part of this is happening with Japan and South Korea. These are two nations that have been close American partners for decades, and America does benefit a great deal from our partnerships with them. Both Japan and South Korea allow the U.S. to station tens of thousands of soldiers inside their borders. So that gives us extremely powerful military bases right next to enemy nations such as Russia and China. Russia and China, of course, are actively working against America in every way they can. So those bases are of immense value to the U.S. It's also been of great value to have vigorous intelligence sharing agreements with Japan and South Korea. Economically as well, to have bilateral, just thriving trade and investment flows with these two technological powerhouse nations. Our collaboration with them has been a major boon to America's innovations in more areas than you could count. I mean, semiconductors, neuroscience, space exploration, just to name a few. And then even in diplomacy, Japan and South Korea have been very reliable diplomatic partners, helping to expand U.S. soft power. But now, Mr. Trump says these partnerships are of no value to him. He seems to be afraid that some of America's God-given blessings might be seeping out into these countries a little bit. He wants it all contained, apparently. So they're both high on the list of tariff targets that Mr. Miiller mentioned a moment ago. Japan is now facing 24% tariffs. With South Korea, it's 25%. So these are extreme measures that President Trump is taking, far beyond what Japan or South Korea require from the U.S., despite what his very puzzling chart that we saw on Wednesday may have said. And these tariffs have the peoples of Japan and South Korea baffled. And it's not just trade. Mr. Trump has also introduced great doubts about the security pacts that America has with partner nations, including Japan and South Korea. At this point, the Japanese and South Koreans are quite unsure if America has any will to help defend them. And so these nations are responding. There have been whispers in both Japan and South Korea about developing their own nuclear arsenals, since they don't really know if they're still under the U.S.'s nuclear umbrella or not. They're both increasing their military might in case they have to go to war alone. And now, as a result of these tariffs on Wednesday, they're actually turning to China. Now, if you look at the history of Asia, it is stunning to learn about how much bad blood there is between Japan and China, between South Korea and China, between South Korea and Japan. There's a great deal of bad blood there. Some of the deepest national hatred on earth, just lingering from extremely barbaric invasions and conflicts. So if you look into that history, then you see just how significant it is right now to have Japan and South Korea and China, these mortal enemies, actually burying the katana and working to integrate their economies. But last week, there was a historic meeting with their 3 foreign ministers, and then another one this week with their trade ministers. And they're trying to iron out a free trade deal. They're also deepening a mechanism called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And then today, China placed a 34% tariff on U.S. goods, the same amount that President Trump placed on China. And by the way, I'm all for that with China. I just think that it shouldn't be the same with countries like Japan and South Korea. But now there have been rumors that Japan and South Korea will respond to the U.S. in lockstep with China, kind of a unified response. Those are just rumors at this point, but these are huge moves. These are major moves, especially when you consider the bad blood between these nations. And I think that this shows an area where the effects of Trump's policies will be a lot more than just some short-term market turbulence. Very few Asia analysts would have ever seen this coming because of the animosity and the hatred between these Asian countries. But Mr. Trump's presidency, it is a black swan event. His priorities and his policies are really helping to accomplish the impossible. what was long thought impossible with the nations of Asia. But really, though, nobody should be surprised to see the nations of Asia coming together because Bible prophecy warned us all along that it would happen in this modern era. Russia and China and Japan and South Korea and other Asian nations will soon be allied together. The books of Daniel and Ezekiel and Revelation, they all show that clearly. So we really shouldn't be surprised to see it happening now. And if anyone would like to understand those Bible passages, I hope you'll go to thetrumpet.com and order your free copy of a booklet we have called Russia and China in Prophecy.
So Russia and China in prophecy, they're talking about these Asian nations coming together, something that we're seeing there. I think we're seeing as well, Europe reacting and I just wanted to read something I stumbled across from the Plain Truth under Mr. Armstrong in 1982. They had a kind of a special issue almost, or a substantial section in the June-July issue on trade wars. It said, these new battles over trade are strident in tone and strong emotions, and no wonder. The focus of these battles is simple. It is preserving and protecting scores of thousands of industries and jobs, the only means of livelihood for millions. It is a matter of national survival. Your job or livelihood or that of your families is directly or indirectly at stake. And I thought that point about it, this being a very emotive issue, is an important one. And it's interesting to see the anger that this has stirred up in Europe that's kind of prompting them to talk about even getting together with Asia, getting together with China. I think Xi Jinping invited the heads of Mercedes, and there's another German car company over to go and talk about this. This is something that does get people riled up and that does lead to high emotions. And I'm not saying all of those emotions are correct. Like I said, I think the world has been taking advantage of American industry for years instead of being grateful for the role that American industry did play in things like World War II. Now, other countries that, understandably, they're going to want a steel industry as well. But I think if we look at Britain, for example, where our last steel factory is closing down because of the tariffs, that's sad. But it's also, I think, the tariffs were kind of the final nail in the coffin, but it was our own destructive environmental policies that caused that. But all of that anger, all of that emotion is being directed at America. But you're seeing a lot of emotion being directed at America. It's stirring up a lot of anger all around the world at America, and that's an important takeaway that we'll pick up a little more in just a second. But I think we've talked about quite a few different things. I just wanted to go back to Andrew to see if you had anything to add to what we've been discussing.
I think the point you made about the reserve currency is really, really important as well. I think that's probably the main way that this could go bad for America, is because historically here in America, like if you look at the long term, the Republicans have been the party of tariffs and the Democrats have been the party of free trade. Now that's changed in the past several decades since World War II, with Ronald Reagan being a big free trader, and then the Republican Party being more pro-free trade all the way up till Donald Trump, who keeps talking about William McKinley and trying to take us back to like the old pre-World War II Republican Party. The aspect that never comes up in these conversations, however, is that in that pre-World War II McKinley area Republican Party, America also ran a balanced budget and was on the gold standard. So we didn't need people to buy our treasury bonds. That wasn't even a factor. Our money was backed by gold. Our budget was balanced. We were just trying to give domestic producers an advantage over foreign producers. Now the dollar's not backed by gold, and we run an almost $2 trillion deficit each year. That's financed by selling 10-year treasury bonds. I think this coming year, like we're going to have to buy close to 10 trillion treasury bonds because a lot of our old treasury bonds that we have to give them back and then buy new ones. And so that treasury bond thing is what's keeping America financed. And so if you get yourself in a position where you need other nations to buy your treasury bonds to keep financially solvent, free trade starts making a little more sense as that, like, okay, well, if we need you to buy treasury bonds, you need dollars in your currency reserve, so buy these bonds, and then we're selling you this in return for trade. If you try to shut that down where you're like, well, we want you to buy our treasury bonds, but we don't want you to buy our goods, there's not, you don't really have a way to make nations do that. It's like someplace like China, they're like, well, if we're not going to be buying your goods, we don't want your treasury bonds either. And then you could get a sense where like these nations start dumping their treasury bonds, and you have a $36 trillion debt you can't finance. So I'm actually do think Donald Trump makes a lot of good points with his tariff policy, but I think it's very good, like just looking at like the holistic package, that this is something that if Doge can cut back government spending and balance the budget, and then you're actually running your budget's balanced and you've got a currency that's backed by something, then the tariffs make more sense. But if you try to do like one end of the equation without the other, you could end up just eliciting the dollar's end as world reserve currency, and now all of a sudden you're needing to borrow $2 trillion every year and have no one buying the bonds. So then you're either forced to increase taxes or start printing money like crazy, and then you've either got a recession or a hyperinflation crisis. It could all get pretty messy pretty quickly. Like I said, if it's not done where you're balancing the budget and putting the tariffs, because I don't really think you can do one without the other one.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's one of the fascinating things about this, and why we're talking about this for the first half of the show, is there are so many different Bible prophecies that this ties into. Going back to this, the point the Plain Truth made under Mr. Armstrong, I thought they had a really good analysis where they said something is wrong with the world's economic and trading systems. Why do trade wars plague mankind about every 50 years? And it talked about, well, this isn't necessarily, like what it says, certainly the Soviet communist system is no answer. Witness Poland and all Eastern Europe and Cuba too. It's not a Marxist criticism to say, well, you have these problems. But it just applied the analysis that Mr. Armstrong brought in so often and says there is a cause for repeating cycles of these crises in world affairs. Millions will not believe it, but the vast majority of humanity are living the wrong way of life. Wrong patterns of living are causing our terrible economic problems. Trade wars with their attendant threats of unemployment and political upsets have a cause. And it talks about, it takes it back to getting and the sources of a competitive spirit. And yet we live in a world where if America lets the rest of the world take advantage of it, well, they'll do it. And they have been for decades. And they'll very eagerly put their own nations first. And, well, yeah, to survive in that kind of world, you do need then America to say, okay, we can't be a charity. You can understand Donald Trump saying, well, we need to put our own nation first. But ultimately, this is still going with a system that is built around get. This article says, destructive competition is the way of taking, exalting self, putting others down, pride and ridicule. It is the way of get. There is, by contrast, an opposite way of life, the give way. The give way is the way of cooperation and encouragement, the way of helping, sharing, and serving others with what one has. It is equal concern for others as well-beings as oneself. And you can imagine a world system built on give, but it's completely different to the one we have now. It's not about protecting my jobs and protecting my industry. It is about what bits of excellence can my country produce and share with the world. And in doing that, we want to consider other countries and consider, our own jobs, but we don't want to take away jobs from other people. But that is an entirely different world, from an entirely different spirit. And this goes all the way back to, it actually goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, this article. It goes all the way back before the Garden of Eden and talks about, the origins of Satan, the origins of this evil spirit that infuses this competition, this way of competition. And what we need is a new world. So I thought that was just a great big picture analysis here. That's the solution to trade war, a new world. But then there are other critical prophecies that are brought out. And you had an article, Andrew, back in January, Blueprint for an Economic Resurgence, that seems all the more appropriate today. And you talked about the good parts. That, there are things that Donald Trump is putting in place with his economy that do get back to God's economic laws and have the potential to bring in great blessings. But there are also major dangers ahead. And well, as you wrote, balancing the budget, refusing to do business with communist dictatorships is a great start towards repentance, but these two changes are not enough. And it's going to take, it will take God's protection, and it will take much larger changes to make a success of this. And so you said there is only one way that God will protect us. Our people must turn from our evil ways. God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, and Donald Trump's re-election represents the last chance for America to turn from evil. Therefore, it's a matter of life and death importance that everyone who hears this message sit up, pay attention, and recognize the seriousnesses of the times. As a nation, America has to decide whether it will repent now or later after much tribulation. And that was my concern with Donald Trump's charts, by kind of trying to say all trade imbalance is due to cheating and unfair trade practices. I think that hides the other problems, other issues. And that means that we don't address these causes, and we don't repent, and we don't see all the different ways that the way that we're living is causing us problems. So that's another important part of this. But then also, the Bible has some very specific prophecies about the world getting together against America and besieging America, launching a trade war against America. And I had an article, Trade Wars Are Here, in the latest Trumpet print that talks about that. But Isaiah chapter 23, for example, describes a mart of nations, and it talks about Kittim, and this refers to China in Bible prophecy. It talks about Tyre, that's a reference to this European economic power that's growing. It talks about Tarshish, Japan. They have this big trading alliance. And Deuteronomy 28 and verse 52, I think it is, talks about America being besieged in all of its gates, cut off from trade and from importation. And you can see exactly what is you can see what's happening now leading exactly to that outcome, and Europe getting together with the Asian giants and besieging America. And that's what we've seen this week. We've seen the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, talking about, we need to draw closer to Mercosur. We need to draw closer to this Latin America trade bloc. And we'll talk to China, and we'll try and get the whole world together to oppose Donald Trump. Now, I don't know whether that will happen this week, right now, in response to these trade wars. But unless we turn around, unless we repent, this is how God is going to up the pressure and correct us more. And if more correction is needed, well, these powers are going to bring down the United States. And it's all about, though, getting back to seeing this fundamental issue of we are all around the world living the wrong way of life. And we need to get away from the way of give to the way of get. And that, it's a massive change, but that's where all of this is leading.
Yeah, it's amazing, just the predictive power of Bible prophecy. Another verse I was thinking about was in Ezekiel 4. It's actually a good bit of the chapter that's talking about this 390-day siege against end-time Israel, America and Britain, that gets so bad that like you've got like starvation style conditions, which is interesting because we know, putting that together with other prophecies, that Europe, Japan, and China are kind of like the three major powers in that trade siege. And so that's a prophecy predicting that the era of free trade we're currently living in is going to end. Although it's also, if you go back in time far enough, kind of a prophecy that this era of free trade would begin as well, because the United States did not start bilateral trade with China, or Kittim, until about 1979. So before 1979, you couldn't have had a prophecy about America suffering under a trade war with China, because China would have started the trade war and no one would have noticed. We didn't buy anything from them anyway. We were, as Donald Trump would phrase it, we were economically independent of China. We didn't need their stuff. If they didn't trade with us, who cares? We don't trade with them anyway. And so for this prophecy to be fulfilled, that like, China's going to stop trading with you and you're really going to suffer. uh, presupposes that you started trading with China and got very dependent on their stuff. And so that drug addiction thing, that Scene Davis analogy that he used, is kind of apropos. Like, you've become addicted to Chinese goods. And now the withdrawals from no longer being able to receive Chinese goods are prophesied to hurt the nation quite a bit. And that's one of the reasons I kind of sympathize with what Donald Trump's trying to do. Is I think he's one of the few world leaders who's actually seen the amount of economic leverage we have given China over us in the past 50 years, and is trying to wean us off that before they cut us off cold turkey. Because it's like, yeah, the more dependent you are on someone to trade, the more it hurts when you stop trading with them. And so if you can start weaning us off that, then a future trade war would be less severe. Which is why I made that point in the Blueprint article about needing God's protection. As America's kind of gotten itself in a bad spot where some, even like critical rare earth minerals, critical metals, things that we need for national defense, that we're now dependent on other nations for. That if they stopped giving us, we'd be in a really bad position. And so you're trying to wean ourselves off of some of these things, but like I said, if it you need God's protection during that process, because if we stop getting these things too quickly, as the Bible indicates will happen if the nation doesn't repent, then you can you could get like this post or this literal apocalyptic scenario where, like, you don't have the rare earth minerals for electronics, you don't have car batteries, you can't get to work in the morning, because these goods that are so dependent on other nations for aren't coming our way. And so I think the notion of an Liberation Day or Economic Independence Day is well phrased, because, like, is this trade war going to hurt economic growth? Absolutely. Is it going to hurt the stock market? Also, absolutely. Is it going to make you reduce your standard of living? Probably. Is it going to make it so that America's, like, secure from other nations in the event of a future conflict? Is like, well, long term, that's the plan. You just need God's protection in the meantime.
Well, thank you for that, Andrew and Jeremiah. Before we move on from both of you, though, Andrew, do you want to update us on any other important news from the English-speaking world this week?
Yeah, I've got 3 smaller stories that I'll present that are just kind of interesting. On the related topic to trade wars and maritime trade and international trade and sea gates, Donald Trump finally signed off a deal for Britain to give up the Chagos Islands this week. And so that's just another like maritime naval base that used to be part of the British Empire that's being lost. On the ongoing Doge front to expose corruption in the U.S. government, they did an audit that found several million, like 5 million illegal immigrants who were in the Social Security system, offering them a pathway to receive welfare benefits and possibly even vote. And so that audit of the Social Security could end up exposing some even more election fraud in past elections in America's systems. Yeah, and one bit of good news, the new Health Secretary, Robert Kennedy, is already flushing out some corruption from his offices, firing several people involved in the COVID cover-up, including Dr. Anthony Fauci's wife, who's now no longer going to be part of the U.S. government. This was one of the biggest conflicts of interest I've possibly heard of in recent times, where Anthony Fauci's wife was in charge of the ethics committee for the Health and Human Services. So she was the one responsible for making sure that her husband, Anthony Fauci, didn't do anything unethical while in office. So a bit of a conflict of interest when you're having someone dealing with such controversial things as the Wuhan lab leak, the vaccine rollout, and the COVID scandal, to have your own wife being the watchdog, making sure that everything you're doing is above board. But finally, the new health secretary has gotten her out of the government as well. So hopefully in the near future, we'll have some more answers about yet another big scandal that's really affected Americans like few other things back in 2020.
Thank you for that, Andrew. And before we move on, we'll also get an update from Jeremiah on other big news in Asia.
Yeah, just a couple of short Russia stories here. First of all, Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a decree ordering the conscription of 160,000 Russians into military service. This was on Monday, and this could have a major bearing on Russia's war against Ukraine. This would allow Russia to replenish some of the losses in the war and also fortify Russian positions along the front. And it shows that Putin is not really thinking about peace. You know, President Trump would like the war to end, and Putin sometimes makes statements suggesting that he's amenable to that. But this draft of 160,000 additional men to go die for Putin shows that he's not really interested in peace. And then in a related story, Putin said on Monday, the same day that he ordered the draft of all these new soldiers, he said that he wants his army to, quote, finish off Ukrainian troops. So Putin has told Trump in recent weeks that a ceasefire may be a good idea as long as he's allowed to have control over Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. It's always been kind of a big ask, especially since Putin has not managed to gain anything close to full control over the last three of those, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. But now, with this statement on Monday, he's saying, forget all of that. Whether I have these 5 regions or not, we need to finish off Ukraine entirely. So I think that this is extremely frustrating to President Trump. I think that he's beginning to learn some tough realities about who Vladimir Putin really is. And it shows that this horrendous war could still go on for a long time.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeremiah. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll look at some other important stories from Europe, as well as an update from the Middle East.
Well, let me quote to you what I wrote in an article in the Plain Truth of July 1935, 4 years before World War II was started by Adolf Hitler. I'll just quote a little out of the center of that entire article that shows what the article was saying and what it was talking about. Listen, quote, out of the present Italy is to emerge a reincarnation of the once great and powerful Roman Empire by an alliance of 10 nations within its territory. That was 4 years before World War II began. Biblical prophecy revealed that it would start as an economic movement, that it would bring an era of unusual prosperity to Europe. It did start in March 1957, when 6 European countries, West Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg, signed the Treaty of Rome, creating what was called the EEC, that is, the European Economic Community. It has been known, of course, as the European Common Market, and it came into being, actual operation, that is, on January the 1st, 1958. Immediately it began to bring economic prosperity to those 6 countries, and has provided economic competition for Britain, for the United States, and for other countries around the world. For years, European nations have wanted to unite in a sort of United States of Europe. What they want is political union, but they've never been able to bring that about. While President de Gaulle of France lived, Germany would never have yielded to accept him as the political head of a union, including Germany, and the French would not accept a German.
That's from a radio broadcast from Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong. And I thought I'd include that as it does bridge the gap a little between what we were talking about in the first half and what I want to get into now. I mean, he was talking about the way that the European Union or the European Common Market was set up to compete with the United States. And that is right at the heart of what we were talking about is the tariffs. But he also talked about how France would have rather liked to lead that, and Charles de Gaulle would have loved to have been a strongman at the head of that European economic community and the head of that political union. But Germany was not about to let that happen. And the main story I want to address for Europe gets right to the heart of France, and France embracing that Holy Roman Empire system, but also Germany exerting some pretty important dominance over France. So this revolves around Marine Le Pen, the leader of what used to be France's National Front. She changed the name to National Rally, and she's been banned from political office. Now, they're very much political charges. So she's been accused of embezzlement, of embezzling funds from the European Union. But she is absolutely not accused of doing that for personal gain. Instead, what she's accused of is taking the funds. So if you're a member of a European Parliament, if you lead a political party in the European Parliament, the EU will give you funding. And that funding is designed to have you set up an office and represent your constituents in the European Union. But she leads a party that has seats in the European Union. She also leads a party that campaigns within France, and it's all the same party. The boundaries between that are a bit fuzzy. What counts as political activity on a European level versus purely domestically in France, that's not massively clear cut. And she is accused of embezzlement because she's accused of taking this European money and spending it on purely political purposes in France. And I think there is no doubt this is political persecution. So it was a French court that handed down the sentence. Now, the sentence can carry, I think it was a 5-year jail term. It will basically amount to 2 years of wearing an ankle monitor. That doesn't come into place until the appeals process is exhausted. But this ban on running for political office comes into place right away. It's already in place. And France's next election is in 2027. So a lot of people are looking at this, rightly so, I think, this politically motivated persecution or this political judicial ruling and saying this is the French court system trying to block a political candidate. Pretty similar to the way the courts went after Donald Trump in America. And I think that's absolutely right. Like, you look at what happens within the European Union and the amount of corruption that goes on in there, I think there were way more MEPs that have done way worse things and been way more corrupt than Marine Le Pen. And you have situations there where they get paid, I think it was about 400 euros a day for just showing up. And you've had TV companies set up and just record all these MEPs marching into the office, signing the register to say that they're present that day, collecting their money and leaving, and not doing any work for the European Parliament that day. There is massive fraud in it. I mean, the whole European Parliament is kind of basically fraud. They voted themselves a special lower tax rate. They have a whole complex where they have subsidized goods and food, and they get free chauffeurs and travel and private school allowance. Like, the entire organization is corrupt. So this is not a concern about corruption. This is about blocking Marine Le Pen from running for political office. And I think this is part of a very dangerous trend in Europe, as Europe rejects democracy, rejects rule of law. They're twisting rule of law to get rid of a political opponent that they don't like. Now, there are reasons for not liking Marine Le Pen. And I think there are reasons for not wanting her party in office. You go back to her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who founded the French National Front, which is where this whole party and where Le Pen came from. I mean, he has kind of shed doubt on whether the Holocaust actually happened. There have been pretty credible accusations of anti-Semitism, even neo-Nazism from this party. Marine Le Pen has distanced herself and her party from the position of her father, even kicking her father out of the party. Reasonable people disagree as to whether these are merely cosmetic changes, whether this is a fundamentally different party. So I can understand people not wanting her in office. But what you've got to do is put this in context with other trends going on in Europe, where Romania has the winner of their election and then the Supreme Court steps in and, again, pretty much bends the rules, comes up with an unprecedented decision saying, nope, election cancelled and you're barred from running. You're having a democracy that says these positions, these candidates, they are not allowed. You can only vote from our fairly narrow selection of approved opinions. It is very disturbing, and it is an attack on democracy. And France plays a critical role in Bible prophecy. Mr. Fleury, trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Fleury, he's given quite a few different Key of Davids on France's role in Bible prophecy, and he's warned about the way that France is empowering the Holy Roman Empire that we heard Mr. Armstrong talk about just a few minutes ago. And this Holy Roman Empire France has ambitions of ruling it, just like de Gaulle did. But that's not going to happen. They are going to be one of the 10 kings. The Bible talks about there being 10 kings, 10 nations that make up this Holy Roman Empire. But they're not going to like where this leads ultimately. In one of these Key of Davids, Mr. Fleury was talking about the movie Casablanca and one of the kind of moving moments in there, and talking about how, well, actually, France is under attack in some ways, and things that they stood up and fought for in World War II that are dramatized by this movie are now under attack. We can play that clip.
But there was a lady in this movie that sang the French national anthem, and there were tears streaming down her face. And as she sang that, and others sang with her, and they were competing with the Germans, and Germans were singing one of their patriotic songs, and of course the French decided after the Germans were singing their song that then they would also sing their national anthem, and this lady had tears running down her cheek because of all the terrible things that were happening, and the Nazis were right there before them, humiliating them. She said, "Vive la France" and "Vive la démocratie." In other words, they're a democracy, but today, well, France is about to lose that democracy in a very horrifying way.
Now, it's not over. There's still people you can vote for. They're just trying to rule out opinions that they don't like, so a compromise with democracy. And Marine Le Pen is appealing this. There are a whole number of different avenues that she can pursue. So this is far from a done deal. But democracy is certainly under threat, and they're certainly compromising it. Mihailo, we usually turn to you as our Middle East correspondent, but I wanted to play another clip from Mr. Fleury from a 2018 Key of David. But just to set that up, he is talking about Genesis 49 and what it has to say about Reuben. And Mr. Armstrong, in his free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, he talked about how the nation of France today is descended from the tribe of Reuben. And even Genesis 49 makes clear that these are end-time prophecies. And so there has to be a distinct tribe of Reuben around somewhere in this end time. Otherwise, well, then the Bible's wrong. And he talked about it being Reuben, and that book is all about the key to unlocking Bible prophecy. We also have a reprint article packet that you can read, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes, that you can read more about why we believe France fulfills that role. It talks about Reuben being unstable as water. And, well, this is what Mr. Fleury has to say about that.
Also, that helps to make France unstable as water, which means they can be manipulated by someone like Germany really well. That's the pity of all of this and the shame of all of it. But certainly, we need to realize that God is not down on France. The French people are a great people, as well as the German people, but they're getting hooked into something that is really dangerous to this entire world, and that is the Holy Roman Empire, as it is called.
And that, I think, is the big picture view of what happened this week. France compromised with its democracy in favor of the Holy Roman Empire. And that is dangerous to this entire world, and it's getting France hooked into something that's going to be very dangerous for them. Joshua Michels had an article on our website, Le Pen, Enemy of Germany Eliminated. And he gets into a very important dimension to this that I think isn't really being talked about. I haven't seen anywhere else. I have seen some other very good articles making good points about democracy being under attack and how this will probably backfire and just make Le Pen more popular than ever and maybe give her the presidency in 2027. I think those are all very, very good points. But this point that France is doing Germany's bidding here is an important point to note. I mean, Le Pen has been very against a lot of what Germany wants right now in terms of rearmament. In 2022, she called a joint arms program with Germany the absolute negative of the French strategic identity. She doesn't support Germany having a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. She's absolutely against France sharing nuclear bombs with Germany in the way these powers are talking about right now. And it was the German European Parliament President, Martin Schulz, who got these allegations and this prosecution of Marine Le Pen started all the way back in 2015. So the Germans would rather block Le Pen out. Emmanuel Macron would rather block Le Pen out. The French court system would rather block Le Pen out. I mean, you're kind of having all of these establishments of the Holy Roman Empire colluding together to keep her out. And in that article, Jacques points to an article by Mr. Gerald Fleury called France Rejects America and Empowers Germany. And this came after, he wrote this after Mr. Macron gave a speech where he talked about France loves Germany. And he said, these words from Macron were, I believe, a signal that France will never again have the will to stand up to Germany. The French today want to be close friends and allies with Germany, and they are prepared to go to great lengths to support Berlin. He said, it really is a groveling statement. Germany is Europe's master, and it is as if France is begging to share in Germany's power. And I think that's, that compromise, that begging to share in Germany's power is what comes across this week. And they're really empowering the Holy Roman Empire there. So this is important to watch. And as Mr. Fleury said in that earlier clip, this is going to be a curse to France and a curse to the world in the long run. There's ups and downs. There's scope for Marine Le Pen to make a comeback. There's various different things that could happen. But ultimately, France is going to be absorbed by the Holy Roman Empire. And Mr. Fleury's article, France Rejects America and Empowers Germany, will give you a lot more about that. And there are prophecies. We mentioned Revelation 17 that talks about these 10 kings. Verse 13 says that these 10 kings, these have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These will all give their power and strength to this European empire led by Germany. And Joshua writes in there, it appears evident that a critic of Germany like Le Pen will not be leading France into this prophetic alliance. And I think you could also say, you can see this happening. You can see France giving up some of its democracy in favor of the beast. These 10 kings are starting to come together, and they're giving their strength and power, just as these trading alliances that are going to bring down the United States are coming together. And when we've talked about how God allowed Donald Trump to come back, to allow a time for a message to go out, to allow America to repent. But this is not a time for complacency. It's coming together with these Asian powers incredibly quickly. We don't know how much time that we have left, and it may be even quicker than we might think. Certainly if America just forcefully rejects that message and that opportunity to repent. So it's important to understand all of these things now. And our book, we mentioned the United States and Britain in Prophecy. That is a great place to start and a master key for understanding world events and understanding Bible prophecy. It's incredible revelation from God, and I'm pointing to a booklet, but this is a booklet that is chock full of scriptures. Like, this is not about ignoring the Bible or elevating a book over the Bible. If I were to take you through all of those scriptures that are in the United States and Britain in Prophecy, I'd be here for hours. I don't have time to do that on this show. I would get lots of complaints in the comments that we're going on for too long. So I can offer you a book that you can order, that you can read online, and that will allow you to turn to the Bible yourself and prove all of these things to yourself. And you can get that at our website, thetrumpet.com. You can drop us an email, trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com, if you have any trouble in ordering that. And we've got all of our contact details and things like that online. Well, just a few other stories from Europe. There are quite a few other important ones. We've talked about France clamping down on democracy. Well, the German coalition that's looking to come together between the left and the right is also talking about clamping down on free speech. They want to tighten the country's incitement of the masses law. And that way, a politician convicted more than once under this law will not be allowed to stand as a party candidate. So they're paving the way to bar leaders from political office, not because of accusations of embezzlement there, but because of what they've said. So again, you're watching in real time this Holy Roman Empire rise and become more dictatorial and compromise with its democracy to help the rise of this power. Also from Germany, Porsche has become the latest car company to look at getting back into the arms trade. They posted a 20 billion euro loss last year. That's from its own internal operations. It also has stakes in Volkswagen. I think it was Porsche's parent company that was doing that. And so they've said, well, we're seeking new business opportunities, including returning to the defense industry. They developed the Leopard 1 battle tank in the 1950s. They were designing light utility vehicles. They've recently bought a big stake in a drones startup. And so they're looking at moving back into defense. Watch for all of these. I mean, we've got these. That's another angle, I think, to these trade wars. If these car companies can't sell to the United States, I mean, watch for that to be used as a reason for them to get back into the arms trade, and that to be a fallout from this. Also from Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, this far-right German party, is close to being the most popular party within Germany. The latest opinion polls put the Christian Democratic Union on 26% and the AfD on 24%, their highest level. So the rise of the far-right happening very quickly there. This is a pretty huge story that's gone under the radar. Germany's first permanent foreign troop deployment officially began this week. We've talked about this at various stages as this is rolled out, but Germany is having its first overseas military base, permanent base, in Lithuania. They're ultimately going to have, I think, 5,000 troops there. They've only got 150 there right now, but the 45th Armored Brigade that's going to be stationed there held its activation ceremony outside Vilnius in Lithuania. So this is another milestone for the breaking of a major taboo on German militarism. It's going to see Germany set up the logistics and supply chain and everything needed to sustain major overseas deployment. Another crucial taboo that is being at least talked about just over a week ago, Germany's Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, they wrote an article saying that Germany must pull out of its 2+4 treaty. This is a treaty that paved the way for the reunification of Germany. It was a treaty other nations wanted in place to allow Germany to reunify, but it banned Germany from having weapons of mass destruction, no nuclear weapons, banned them from having an army bigger than 370,000. So they're talking about cancelling that as Germany becomes this military power once again. And really with both of these stories, nobody really cares. These are huge events. Germany is becoming a military power once again, and everybody in the world is okay with that and even cheering them on. And again, Bible prophecy and even history warns to be very, very, well, more than very, very careful, to be very alarmed by this. Another quick story where Greece has become the latest European country to kind of join in with a massive, rapid military turnaround. They announced a 25 billion euro spending plan to beef up its military that would last until 2036, where Greece will buy submarines, air, sea, and underwater drones. They'll get their own communication satellites. They're going to develop a new anti-aircraft dome, which they're calling the Achilles shield, which, given what Achilles is most famous for, having a vulnerability seems like a terrible name to me. But anyway, I think the importance of this story is Greece is kind of an underrated military player in Europe. They do have a military that is much more powerful than you would think for a country and an economy of their relatively small size because of their long-standing rivalry with Turkey. So this big push to modernization, it really does up the military assets available to all of Europe. And then while this is happening, it looks like Britain has gotten the green light from President Trump to retreat, where we're looking at giving the Chagos Islands to Mauritius and paying Mauritius reparations, despite the fact they have never owned the Chagos Islands. They have no historic ties to them. We're just handing over the Diego Garcia military base kind of just to a random country. It makes no, and then paying them, it makes absolutely no sense. But I was hoping Donald Trump would step in and veto that deal. And at least according to Downing Street, he won't do that, though he did make some comments yesterday that made it sound like he hasn't completely signed off on that yet. So maybe there's some hope there. And then also France, in terms of Europe being more aggressive, they're threatening Iran with war. Its foreign minister said this week that if France doesn't agree to a new nuclear deal, military confrontation would seem to be almost inevitable. So you're seeing Europe increasingly take the lead in confronting Iran. And that brings us to our final segment. And Mihailo Zekic is also kind of invading Europe a little bit. He's got a story that ties in with both the Middle East and Europe. And so we'll hear a little more on that from Mihailo.
Yes, so on the evening of April 2nd, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made an official visit to Budapest to visit Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He's at the time of filming still there. He'll be leaving this weekend. This is notable because Hungary is a partner to the International Criminal Court, or ICC. Almost all of Europe is. Hungary would have an obligation to arrest Netanyahu for visiting there.
Because of the arrest warrant that they've put out for him.
Of course, accusing him of the ludicrous charges of war crimes, which we've covered plenty on our website. But not only did the Hungarian authorities not do that, and I mean, they knew this going ahead of time. This was an open flouting of the ruling. But they made a very big ceremony of him visiting. They had an honors guard waiting for him. This is the first time that a European Union country has done that. Orban, when he was first prime minister in the 90s, he brought Hungary into the ICC, and now he's leaving it. And this is how Prime Minister Netanyahu responded to that.
This is a very moving day for me. You have, in your leadership, have done remarkable things for Israel and the Jewish people. You support Israel proudly, unstintedly. You stand with us at the EU. You stand with us at the UN. And you've just taken a bold and principled position on the ICC, and I thank you, Victor.
That was a bit eyebrow-raising for me, because if anybody's followed our coverage about Viktor Orban for the past 10, 15 years, you know that he does have a lot of baggage with him. He is a bit of a pariah in the European Union, in NATO. He has done a lot of things that are a bit concerning regarding power grabs, dissolving of the free press, manipulating of elections, even religious persecution of pastors that don't agree with him. He has been accused of democratic backsliding. Because of that, that includes a lot of outreaches to Israel when a lot of countries in Europe have been blacklisting Israel for their war in Gaza and for many things before that. Because of that, the Israeli Prime Minister has relied on Orban as basically his best friend in Europe. And to Orban's credit, he has stood up for Israel in forums like the United Nations and the EU. He mentioned in his speech, Orban did, that Hungary's Jewish community, which is about 100,000, is the safest in Europe, and that's probably not an exaggeration. Hungary does not have a problem with streams of Islamic migrants coming in. It doesn't have a terrorist problem. Israeli visitors come to Hungary all the time and say they could speak Hebrew on the street without anybody giving them dirty looks. So in that respect, he has been pretty good to Israel and to the Jewish community at large. It is an interesting dichotomy when you have this leader that's doing a lot of things supporting Israel, but at the same time taking Hungary down a path that is pretty similar to what it went down through World War II. He's put up a statue of the Nazi collaborationist dictator in a prominent place in Budapest. That's not exactly something you'd expect somebody that is close to Israel to do.
And this is more of Viktor Orban being the EU's problem child. You mentioned their accusations from Europe, some of which I think are completely unjust. Some of them do have some reasonable basis. He is also generally closer to Russia than at least France and kind of that segment of the European Union would like. And for one EU country to kind of unilaterally leave the International Court of Justice is a pretty big blow to the EU acting as a bloc when it comes to foreign policy, though Friedrich Merz has invited Benjamin Netanyahu to visit Germany. Poland has said he'll be welcome in Poland. France have said they won't arrest him. So other EU leaders have kind of laid the welcome mat out despite the International Criminal Court ruling. But And where do you see this dichotomy that you've highlighted leading?
Well, one prophecy we've highlighted, maybe not so much in this program, but more on our website, is in Ezekiel 23, which prophetically speaks of the nations of Israel, including the United States and Britain, and the United States and Britain in prophecy, among other literature we have available, can explain that, as well as Judah, the state of Israel, are mentioned under separate names, Aholah and Aholabah. They're typified as women, Aholabah specifically being Judah or the state of Israel. And God condemns both sisters for looking out to what the Bible calls lovers, or relying on foreign allies for safety and protection rather than God himself. For Aholabah specifically, Ezekiel 23 verses 12 and 17 read, quote, "She doted upon the Assyrians her neighbors, captains and rulers clothed most gorgeously, horsemen riding upon horses, all of them desirable young men. And the Babylonians came to her into the bed of love, and they defiled her with their whoredom, and she was polluted with them." Now, foreign names, we have plenty of resources on our literature showing the Assyrians are the Germans, the Babylonians are, or the Chaldeans, as it elaborates in the prophecy, are the Italians. This is what Mr. Fleury, our editor-in-chief, writes in an October 2014 article. Quote, "Verses 16 and 17 discuss more lovers of these two sisters, not just Assyria, but also Chaldea and the Babylonians. While these two were differently than Assyria anciently, the Babylonian lover today is in cahoots with Assyria, morphing into the Holy Roman Empire." In another book called Ezekiel, the End Time Prophet, Mr. Fleury writes, "The Babylonians are the end-time Holy Roman Empire, which is the European Union, allied with the great false church." Now, the point I want to make with this is we talk a lot in this program about Germany and the Israelite countries trusting in Germany, etc. But there's more than one country in there that is part of the European Union, is part of this rising up of the Holy Roman Empire. And according to Ezekiel 23, Israel, the state of Israel, does a bit of shopping and is looking at the Europeans as a whole for security, for protection, as things get more chaotic, as they're realizing they can't rely on what they've been doing before. And Viktor Orban, whether or not he is one of those 10 kings, either way, he's still doing things that we expect the 10 kings to be doing, and Israel knows that, and they're still relying on him quite significantly for protection in international forums or for some of these other diplomatic exchanges. And one little update before we move on. There have been rumblings in Israeli media that Orban might take the opportunity for this visit to announce that they're moving Hungary's embassy to Jerusalem. They tried to do that before October 7th. That got derailed. The visit's still for another couple of days, so we might have more developments on this story as we continue. But you're seeing people, like the Israeli leadership, get chummy with these kinds of characters that ultimately, God says, is going to backfire on them in a spectacular way. And the more Israel walks into this trap, the more Israel even ignores blatant warning signs, the more it's going to be at risk to this.
Now, you also have, I think, another story from the Middle East that you wanted to update us on.
Yes, there's been a skirmish between the Israeli Defense Forces and armed Syrians near the Syrian town of Nawa. It's a little bit unclear who exactly they were fighting. It doesn't look like it's HTS or the militia with the official government. Instead, the Islamic Resistance Front in Syria, which is a more obscure militia that's specifically against Israel in Syria, they've claimed responsibility. The Syrian government, for their part, while they haven't claimed anything, they have accused Israel of trying to destabilize Syria. We're literally having Israeli ground forces in Syria right now fighting Syrians. It's very small scale, and I highly doubt it's going to erupt into an actual major out-and-out war. But with the fall of the Assad regime, and the new Islamist takeover, the new Turkish-backed takeover in Syria, we are seeing Syria become more and more of a security threat that's getting under Israel's skin, and we could expect, as long as this continues, to become a sore spot for Israel.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mihailo. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to you, the viewer, for joining us today. Wherever you're watching, please do give us a like or subscribe on YouTube, Rumble. That really does help us get the message out there. And you can get in touch with us. So if you have any questions, trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com. We do get some good questions via that. I had one this week that I still need to respond to. So if that was you, hopefully I'll have something back to you by the end of the day or the end of the weekend. We like to thank George Haddad and Victor Granados for engineering and production. We'll be back with our regular show on Wednesday, and until then, keep watching your world.